Good morning, friends. We are continuing with the art of supportive leadership, how to work with people. Let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Guru Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Bless us with divine understanding, that our hearts may open, our minds become clear and calm, and our spirits soar in the skies of your presence. Take us through this world step by step, always following your inner guidance. We are your children. We long to live by thy ideals and to feel thy presence within us. Bless us and guide us. Om. Peace. Amen. All right, we are in the last parts of Swamiji's, the summary of the chapter on intuition and common sense. And yesterday I made the observation that at the end of every chapter, Swami has bullet points, varying in the number depending on the chapter. And instead of choosing a consistent way of saying it, like almost anyone who is writing a book would say, and here's a summary of this chapter, or summary points, or remember these points. But every single last section of every single chapter, which there's about 11 or so, he says it differently. The message, and this is what now I'm paying attention to it, the message of this chapter might be distilled into the following rules, might be distilled. His creativity, and there's a quality about Swamiji that really comes out when you start looking at his writing, but it was a characteristic of his life that I always was aware of, and as I have grown older, I've had more life experience, the importance of it gets more and more clear to me, which is that he was always conscious of what he was doing. When I was starting on this cycle there was a period of time when I was living at Ananda Village, but my weekday job was that I would travel to the Bay Area primarily and south from Ananda Village, and I would give 3 classes a week. I would be the first night in Sacramento, the second night in San Francisco, and the third night in Palo Alto. And when I was starting this cycle for the first time, the class title and content was the same in all 3 places, whether it was about the chakras or how to get along with people, or I don't even remember, but I had also how to know and trust your inner guidance, how to find peace in a peaceless world. These were all topics I used. So I would go and be in Sacramento, be in San Francisco, and be in Palo Alto, and I would give the first class. Now, if you were a professor and you had notes and you had a 4-class series and you knew what each class was, you would just go and you would get out your notes and you would convey the information. But the way Swamiji trained us to speak is what you see me doing here, which is we try to feel intuitively in the moment exactly what's needed. Because on the subjects that we talk about, there's literally an infinite number of things you could say. So you can arbitrarily decide that these 10 are the right ones, but the moment that you're there, depending on who's listening, depending on what you learned yesterday or dealing with today, the one who's speaking, it's a unique moment in time, and therefore the inspiration that flows through you cannot be predicted. And the groups, I was going to the Ananda centers, but it wasn't entirely just people who were already with us. People would come who had never come before. But the vibration of Sacramento, San Francisco, and Palo Alto were very, very different, one from another. So what was really appropriate to say in Palo Alto didn't always make a lot of sense to the people in Sacramento, or it certainly wasn't their first way of thinking. So I was going to do this where I was going to go, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, class 1. Then I would come back Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, class 2. Except each of my class 1s would have been different. And therefore, what would be class 2? And this was, I guess actually I recorded, but I didn't think to listen. I think listening to the recordings didn't seem like an idea to me. I said to Swamiji, how am I going to remember when I'm there again on the second Monday? How am I going to remember of all the things I might have said, which things I did say, and therefore where to follow up on? Swami's answer was so simple. He said, by being completely conscious while you're talking. Now, of course, you would just think that would be automatic, wouldn't you? Because if you were unconscious, you wouldn't be talking. But the fact is, a lot of times when we're talking, people are unconscious. You can just see them, they're just talking. But they're not at all conscious of what they're saying in the way Swami meant that. And at first I laughed. I think I made a joke about it. Oh, well, I'm glad you told me that. Now I'll just do that. But in fact, he was exactly right. And it was fascinating to me when I had to start the cycle back. As soon as I was in that room in Sacramento, and it was a fairly consistent, looking at the same group, as soon as I was there with them, I remembered it all. I couldn't have told you during the week what I said in Sacramento, what I said in San Francisco. I couldn't at all because, well, among other things, we're trained to just to drop it out of your mind. As Swami put it, he doesn't store up the best bits and then use them again. In fact, he does exactly the opposite. He tries to just put it aside and forget it completely. And he really does. He just forgets what he said. Because otherwise, one would be inclined, and this is what I call it, to teach from memory, which is, I remember having said that, and people liked it, so I'm going to say it again. But in the act of saying it, you're bored, absolutely bored to tears, because you're just repeating what you said before. Talk about tedious. So, but when you're in the moment, when you're right in the moment and you're just right there, it's extraordinarily dynamic and, what's the word with it? Uplifting. That's the word I mean. To just it's uplifting just to be present, to be, as Swami suggested, conscious while you're talking. So it's very interesting. I'd come back to Sacramento and I just remembered. I could just remember what it was and I just picked it up. So it was the same. I did it in all 3 cities as if I was only just doing one series. It was all the same to me, just because of what Swami said, to be conscious of what you're saying. So just this little thing that Swami does here, where he stops and thinks, and it's not a technique. I'm sure he didn't plan it in advance. I'm sure what happened for him, I expect what happened for him, was that he wrote the summary, and the way he felt about each of those sections, when he summarized it, he felt a little differently about the words that he was writing, depending on the subject. And as I was saying yesterday, this subject is intuition. And as I mentioned several times, it's not helpful to being intuitive to be too dogmatic about it. So he's might be distilled into the following rules. Please consider. Here's the message. This might be a way to think about it. He's personifying everything he says about being a leader. There's very good reasons why these rules might really represent it, but let's see if they do. So, moving on. Number 6 of the 9 points that he made, be wary of supporting your proposals on intuitive grounds only. Try to present your ideas in such a way as to invite intelligent response. I've titled this one, How to Build a Strong Team. Everything about using your intuition properly will result in your building a strong team. If you use your intuition, even if it's very good intuition, If you use it improperly, you will gradually disempower the people who are working with you. And this, try to present your ideas in such a way as to invite intelligent response. Now, these are also like things, if you're in a leadership position, you have to pay attention. If you hold a meeting and you present ideas and an intelligent discussion does not result, of course, you might have a team that doesn't have that kind of initiative, but you want to create the magnetism where you will attract those kinds of people. If your team, with you present, can't have intelligent discussions, then you have to think very carefully about what are you putting out that prevents them from doing that, especially if they're very lively when you're not in the room. So if your presence actually quashes the lively discussion, the sharing of ideas, the creative offering, if people don't have the nerve to put out, possibilities that might not be absolutely true, but just want to explore and to brainstorm, and one creative idea leads to another, then you have to think, what am I doing that is quelling the capacity in people to respond to me intelligently. Just a moment, I grew up in a family, my heritage is Jewish, and we were a typical sort of intellectual Jewish family. When I got to Ananda and I started cooking, Swamiji was able to transfer to me a certain intuition about cooking. And it was sort of an odd experience. It was over a weekend that he asked me to cook with him when he had a guest there. And all I did was wash dishes and chop vegetables. I mean, there was no instruction. But at the end of 3 days, I had an intuitive sense of how to cook, and I've been able to do it ever since. Especially I could do it in relation to Swami. I mean, cooking for him, cooking for his guests. But I was able to receive that when I think he tried to convey intuitive understanding to me in many other areas that it took me much longer to receive, if ever. But cooking wasn't at all important to me. I had no cross-current of ego in it. Writing was incredibly important to me. Singing was a huge issue for me. Cooking, didn't matter. In my family, it just wasn't valued because we were so intellectual. And my brother was a competitive debater at a very high level. He won the state championship of Texas with his partner 2 years in a row. Texas is a big state, but he was that good. And in our family, conversation was debate. When we talked, we debated. Now, you have to understand, in real formal debate, you're not really arguing, you're arguing for the judge. You're not so much arguing for each other. So you're not arguing at the person next to you. You're not trying to beat them down. You're trying to show that your ideas are valid, and you have to cover all of the ideas that are raised. So in my family, if you had a point of view that you wanted to put across, the way you put it across is you presented all your best arguments as if it was your first 5-minute presentation in your debate. I did a little bit of debate, but I didn't enjoy it as much. You put out all your best ideas first, and then you would wait, and there was nothing personal about it. And then you would wait, and then whoever responded next would counter with whatever information or point of view they had that would contradict the points that you made. And then you would have a chance to rebut, and so on. And I thought that was conversation. And it was decades before I found out that that was not conversation. That when you do that, instead, people feel quite intimidated for the most part, or feel bullied, or feel like that you've already figured it all out, so why should they speak? It's a funny thing, because if that's your mindset, you think, well, of course I want to know all the arguments. I want to know the whole condition before I think about it. But very often, if you present it all like that, it's, as my friends said to me, it's a conversation stopper. So you have to ask, Swami uses the specific, if you only support your ideas on intuitive grounds, people have nothing to say. But I'm taking it just a little farther. Try to present your ideas in such a way as to invite intelligent response. And if you're not getting it, consider how you can present things differently. He says, always, number 7, always be guided by common sense. Common sense is such an interesting, if you have it, it's so self-evident. And if you don't have it, and if you have it and you have people who don't have it, it's a very interesting dynamic, because it's sort of hard to get it across. So Swami defines common sense is the willingness to learn from experience. So that makes us, as we talked about, open to points of view other than my own, to information and experience that I might not have had. It also allows us, as people are often saying, if you don't study history, you're doomed to repeat it. And therefore you want to know what the implications of certain things are. And we talked about it a lot already, so I don't have to go back into it. Here it's number 9. Common sense and intuition can be developed hand in hand, each offering its own type of clarity to the other. Common sense should check the suggestions of intuition, and intuition should inspire common sense always to look beyond the enclosure of the known to the open pasture of the unknown. I was just remembering as I was reading this, there was this man, his name was Marcel Vogel, he's no longer on the planet, and he was a very far out thinker, and he was responsible for a lot of innovations having to do with crystals for healing and so on. I might have talked about him in this broadcast, so I'm not going to say too much more, but here's another story. He was an exceedingly far out character, extremely enjoyable. IBM hired him just to think, on the condition, paid him a good salary to do whatever he wanted, whatever experiments he wanted, but whatever he invented, IBM owned. So it was perfect. He had a patron just to be a crazy scientist, because he was a scientist and an engineer as well as a 1,000 other things. His wife was the most just common sense, down-to-earth person. She wasn't interested in any of his far-out ideas. And I remember he and his wife came to lunch at Swamiji's house. And Marcel was so far into, the unusual world that he actually had the power, so he said to us and then demonstrated, that he could bend a spoon. This was, at that time, there was an Israeli psychic named Uri Geller, and he would go on television and he would bend spoons. Spoons are hard to bend, so it wasn't just physical force. With the power of his mind, he could, change the molecules in the spoon. I don't know what it was, because it wasn't like he suddenly became strong enough to bend that spoon. He could just hold it in his hands and then just bend it, just like it was a blade of grass or something like that. So Marcel had apparently developed this ability too. He could bend spoons. So we're here at the lunch table, and naturally we're all incredibly intrigued by the idea of watching someone bend a spoon. Like, why not? And his wife keeps saying, Marcel, what are they going to do with a bent spoon? If you bend the spoon, you have to straighten it out again. Otherwise, look, how can you use a bent spoon? She just kept talking about how ridiculous it was to ruin our silver set like that. Marcel was totally loved his wife and was just totally charmed by her opposite nature. He did bend the spoon for us. He probably bent it back, but I don't actually really remember what happened. Because what stuck out in my mind more was her. But they were such, as I think about it further, they were such an extraordinary combination, because she was just nothing but common sense. Her concern was not whether he could bend the spoon with his mind, but what are you going to do with the bent spoon afterwards? And he just lived in another realm. But she took care of him and kept him sane and kept his life going on levels that he was not interested in doing. And, she loved him and admired him, but she didn't really much care about the far-out stuff he was doing. Funny world, isn't it? But Swamiji is adding, he's just summarizing here, common sense and intuition. Intuition should inspire common sense, always to look beyond the enclosure of the known to the open pasture of the unknown. So this is what we have to watch in ourselves. And the word is fear. The word is lack of imagination. The word is not, wanting everything to stay within tight, comfortable parameters where I already know everything that's going to happen. Of course, a person can do that, but endless opportunities will be missed. So much for intuition and common sense. So we're going to just spend a few minutes starting the next chapter, and we'll deal with it much more in the future sessions. Chapter 8, the importance of flexibility. It is not weakness in a leader to admit error. We've heard that before. It's very important. I think Swami's going to say it to us more than once, because one of the oddest misunderstandings that leaders get is that their power comes from the aura of infallibility that they develop. And of course, inasmuch as no one is infallible, the tension of having to always appear infallible causes the leader to become more and more self-concerned, and the very definition of bad leadership is excessive self-concern. And if it's all because I've set up this idea that what it means to be a leader is to always know and to always be right. So it is no weakness. I mean, it's a good choice of word. It's not a weakness to admit your error, because what you're saying is, oh, look, I can learn. I had a certain point of view, and now my point of view has been broadened. Swami said that Master often shifted his point of view in light of new information. You think, well, the Master was omniscient, he was infallible. But Swami said it acts out in a very different way. He said there is, divine revelation where Master is speaking in the voice of God, but in the ordinary course of life, Master was very normal and very, very humble. He would make a statement or say, let's do a plan in a certain way, and someone would say, well, sir, that's not really going to work because, the supplies that we wanted are not there, or that article we read about that location, turns out the article was wrong, or today is not a good day because of this. Master would change his mind. He didn't have to have all the facts in front of him. Even on bigger things, when he would set out to do something, if there was a changed condition, he would listen to it. Why would you not? You see, you have to ask yourself, why would you not? What makes a good leader is when people can rely on you, that you are predictably trustworthy. And that is the power that comes. That's why I often, and have even in this little discussion, I talk about the absolute sincerity and clarity with which Swami spoke. One of the things about Swamiji was you could always trust him. He wouldn't flatter you. He wouldn't shine on when things were not. He just never tried to pretend. Countless times I can remember where Swami would say to someone, I have to be sincere with you. And then he would say something like, I don't think that's going to work. I'm not fond of that idea. Whatever it might be, it would just be, I have to be sincere with you. I can't just say what you want me to say or say what I said yesterday if it's not sincere. So as a consequence, you always knew where you stood with Swamiji. You always knew where he stood. And there was no ulterior motives there. And part of that was, it seemed like a good idea. It didn't work. I thought so-and-so would respond to it, but they didn't. I thought this was the situation, but it wasn't. Nor is it weakness to agree to other ideas than his own. So there it is. There's the other thing that leaders think. All the ideas have to be mine because that's what makes me the leader. It can either be just pure arrogance or it can be a misunderstanding of how to get the respect of your team. You know, if you think I have to be the one who always does it, but it's not weakness to say, oh, that's a much better idea. I remember Swamiji commenting once. We were having a conversation about creativity and prosperity, and Swami talked about how frustrating it was for him, as he put it. He said that he would sometimes just toss out ideas just in order to get the creative possibilities going. And he said maybe he has, 4 or 5 ideas that are okay, but someone has 3 more that are much better, and they know their ideas are better, but they think, well, I have to do what Swami says. Of course, his position of spiritual leadership would make people project that upon him. But he said it was very, as Swami put it, was very frustrating for him when people would do that, because he just wanted, and this is what we were talking about in the previous chapter, he just wanted to do what would work. And he wanted to follow what was true. He wasn't there to prove that he could be the channel for it. He was, and you see, this is all comes back to, who am I trying to serve? What am I trying to accomplish? Am I just trying to serve myself in my own position? Or am I really dedicated to the ideals that we're all working for? So it's no sign of weakness to have somebody else consistently have better ideas. And so we put forth the best that we can think of. And sometimes, and of course this happens really often, a person will give an idea that's close. And then because they've gotten close, then all of a sudden the better idea can come out. Because it starts people thinking along a certain line. And then you say, oh, well, that's good, but this might be better. I'm sure you've been in dynamic group discussions where just suddenly, there's a spark of creativity. And that spark of creativity is when people are at ease and are able to just be themselves and be able to open up to intuition and aren't afraid themselves. There was I was going to say famous, just once there was in a group, and the friend was sort of saying, he wanted to put out an idea. He wasn't really nervous, it was just his way of introducing. And he said, let's see, how did he say it? I have an idea. I'm not sure if it's a good idea or not. I'm not even sure if I believe it myself. But here it is. And it wasn't like he was afraid to be wrong. It was just he kept adding phrases to his introduction until he finally got to it, and it became a standing joke. I'm not sure if this is a good idea. I'm not sure if it's helpful. I'm not even sure if I believe it. The next point is then, why are you saying it? But it was all in good fun. And it was a meeting with Swami about something fairly important. But even that showed that Swami had created an atmosphere in which you could just do that. You could just say, I might look silly for saying this, but who cares? This is what it is. I'm going to just close with this story, which is slightly related. I was sitting at the lunch table once with Swami and a group of people, and they were working on something to do with the publishing business, which wasn't my direct concern. When Swami would visit in this area, he would stay in our house, and I would serve these meals, and we would have 10 or 12 people around the table. Swami often would bring key members of his team from the village to Palo Alto, and sort of in another atmosphere, they could often be very creative. So we provided a kind of meeting house. And it was a lunch table conversation of what to do about a certain project. And there were a lot of strong voices at the table, and they were all talking. And I suddenly had an inspiration that I thought was a really good one, and I kept trying to get a point in, and I couldn't get my point in. And finally, I just said from my seat at the table, listen to me, listen to me, listen to me. And I was half joking, but I also wanted them to listen to me. But Swami, who was sitting next to me, he turned to me with so much kindness and said, Asha, we always listen to you. Oh my gosh, that was the adventure of being with him. You never knew when it was just going to turn into something completely else. But when he said that, it wasn't just to me, it was, I always listen. He was talking about, not me, he was talking about himself. I always listen. And he did. That's the kind of leader you want to be. God bless you, my friends.